Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy Varnum, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I'm a learner of wine, and we hope you'll sip along with us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wines We Drink podcast. You are joining us today for our fourth episode of the fourth season. Isn't that funny? I'm Charlotte Norsworthy Varnum, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Keith Herndon, a certified wine sommelier.
Hello, Charlotte, and hello to our loyal listeners and to our new ones. We're in my wine kitchen today recording an episode where I get to talk about a recent wine trip and the awesomely delicious wines that my wife and I found on this jaunt.
Oh my gosh. Listeners, if you don't know this by now, I'll let you in on a little Wines We Drink truism. We love it when Keith travels to a wine region and comes back with a selection for the podcast. We consider it scientific research around here. So I just know it's going to be wonderful. Please stay with us. I feel like we're going to be in for a treat today.
Thanks, Charlotte. Of course, I haven't been to all of the places that produce wines that I like to drink, but there is a list, okay? And my wife and I are slowly but surely checking them off, right?
Well, and last week's wine was a discovery from one of your California wine trips, and it was a beauty. It was a truly bone-dry Gewürztraminer, which I've mastered at this point, but maybe not, from the Sonoma coast. And so if you miss that episode or any others, you can find it along with all the other episodes from seasons 1, 2, and 3 on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yeah, and I'll also mention that we have a wonderful guide to all of our episodes at wineswedrink.com. So please go check out our website.
Absolutely.
So last week's wine was a special discovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll agree that this week's selection is going to be equally impressive.
Well, that's great news for me and my tongue. Where are we going today?
Well, we're headed to upstate New York and the increasingly popular Finger Lakes region. This area grows a lot of different varietals, okay? You'll find the familiar Chardonnay, Pinot Gris. Those are among its white wines. And then Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and a peppery Blaufränkisch among its red varietals. But one of my favorite wine writers, Letty Teague of the Wall Street Journal, was writing about this region, and she put it this way, quote, "While other grapes have long been planted in this land of rolling hills and stunning views, Riesling is the unquestioned star," end quote.
Ooh, so I'm assuming this means you're treating us today with a Riesling.
Yes, a dry Riesling to be more specific. Rieslings can be sweet and semi-sweet, but I prefer mine to be dry. We were in the Finger Lakes area for about a week, and we tasted a lot of wines. Whites, reds, rosés, and sparkling wines. We had some amazing tasting room experiences and winery visits. I mean, everyone in the area there was so welcoming. So this is not a pretentious wine area at all, but it takes producing quality wines very seriously. And not to diminish or diss the area's red wines by any stretch, or any of its other whites for that matter.
Right.
We had a lot of good ones. But Letty Teague is correct. Riesling is the star of the show there. The vintners in the Finger Lakes are turning out world-class Rieslings.
Wow, world-class. I mean, that's some remarkably high praise. If we're talking about the world of Riesling, where besides the Finger Lakes would one even go to find comparable wines?
Well, the folks at Wine Folly, and you've heard me mention Wine Folly before, I love their wonderful guides and resource materials. Wine Folly tells us that the best Rieslings grow along the Mosel River in Germany. Those wines have a distinct flavor profile. Some would call it a minerality that comes from the soils that are mostly slate rocks there. The Alsace region of France is also known for some terrific Riesling. And I've also had wonderful selections from Washington State, California, especially the central coast of California. And Australia has two areas that do a nice Riesling, the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley, right? So you can find some good Rieslings from a lot of the world's top wine-producing countries, right? Some have a high concentration of a natural compound known as TDN, which gives the wine a distinct petrol aroma, right? I tend to avoid those, but some people really like that attribute and seek it out.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I mean, with so many styles and iterations and approaches and so many Rieslings to choose from, how did you even come about deciding on today's selection?
Well, from the very first day in the Finger Lakes, I knew we would be featuring a wine from the trip. So let's talk more about that region for a moment, right? We had some simply delicious wines at places including Wagner, Hillick and Hobbs, Herman J. Wimmer, and of course, Dr. Constantine Frank. I mean, you can't go to the Finger Lakes and not go to Dr. Frank's. I mean, Dr. Frank is credited with starting the wine industry in that area. He came there from the Ukraine in the 1950s. The winery is still run by his family, and they do a fantastic job. But on this show, we typically open just one bottle and dive into it. I could have picked 3, 4, 5 today.
Okay, so what's the one bottle then that we're opening from your amazing trip to the Finger Lakes?
It's a 2020 bottle from Ravines, which is a winery that expresses the grape through a very dry classical style. Morton and Lisa Holgren own Ravines. Morton grew up in the wine business in the Côte de Provence in southern France. He trained in France in oenology and winemaking. Interestingly, he began his Finger Lakes tenure as a winemaker at Dr. Frank's, but he and Lisa struck out on their own and launched Ravines in 2001. So today, Ravines has about 130 acres of estate vineyards, and we happen to be in their tasting room in the midst of a vineyard near Seneca Lake.
Ugh, that sounds amazing. And I'm ready to drink some dry Riesling then. Let's do it.
Well, yeah, sure. Allow me to pour a couple of glasses here.
Right.
I'm gonna pop the cork on this thing. I guess uncork it as opposed to pop it.
There you go.
We did have some prosecco to start the season, right?
Such a good sound.
So let me pour the first glass here for you.
Awesome.
And I will pour
Pour
me
you
a
some.
glass.
I mean, as you're pouring, it's such a beautiful, like, yellow gold color, especially compared to the Gewürztraminer that we had. It's much more of a potent color.
Yeah, I think the color is typical for this varietal. Riesling can age a bit, thanks in part to their high acidity. So an older one may be even more golden than the one we're drinking, you know. So now I want you to put your nose in the glass and think about what first comes to mind in terms of those aromas. Yeah, we're going to do a big sniff here.
Big sniff.
Yes.
I mean, those citrus and floral notes are really up front with this one, and they're like battling one another, but or maybe complementing is less violent. But it's there's like a lemon lime tandem at work here, but also there's something else going on there.
Yeah. So even though this is a 2020 vintage, it still has that fresh citrus aroma, right? But I also think you're right about those floral aromas. I mean, they're up front as well. The tasting notes refer to jasmine, honeysuckle, and even a hint of orange blossom. So I think that citrus is also captured in the floral notes, right? Mm-hmm. So that ties back into that citrusy vibe we get, right? Yeah. So now it's time to go in for that first sip.
Oh, goody. Here we go.
Right, yeah.
Oh, man. Wow. Well, first of all, I keep forgetting that this is a 2020 vintage. That is so exciting and so cool. And, man, those flavors just pop in your mouth. The citrus right there. And they really aren't just aromas of citrus. You really are getting the flavor of lemon and, like you were saying, some of that orange blossom. I'm going to go in for that second taste.
Yeah. So take as many sips as you need, because this is something that needs to unwind a little bit. I think you need a couple of more sips, to really detect these flavors. As you would expect with a citrusy wine like this, you're going to get some mouth-watering acidity. The winemaker said this wine, quote, shows terrific balance and tension from the integrated acidity, end quote.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it does have acid, which for me, in this style particularly of wine, is a good thing. I really love it. And it hits you square in the center of your tongue. And on those second and third sips, I think that that's where the balance really is coming into play for me. And more tree fruits coming through. I feel like there's hints of pear and green apple, you know, the stone fruits that we like to call.
Absolutely. Those tree fruit flavors seem to give this wine a bit of weight, right? If you understand, you know, I also get a little tad of peach in there as another stone fruit, but there's a tropical undertone there. There's a little touch of pineapple, and to me, it's this tropical undertone that sets it apart, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like especially, you know, we don't often talk about the in-between sips flavor. You know, what really lingers for a long time on that finish. And I really do feel like that's what the pineapple is. So, you know, this is really such a drinkable wine. And those we were talking about the unwinding of the flavor and really how long you can enjoy the flavors of this wine. So those floral aromas are unwinding, the citrus is getting in there, and it's supported by those stone fruits. And you just want to keep coming back because it's such a journey every time and it changes over time. You know, I know we talked about the acidity, but listeners, don't want you to get the wrong impression here. It's not too much. It's just a little tang.
Yeah, I mean, the famous wine critics agree with you on this point about the citrus being just right. James Suckling, for example, described the wine as succulent, adding that, quote, "The best thing about this wine is the long, very silky finish," end quote.
See, there we go. I mean, it's very pleasing, that finish.
Right. Some of that can certainly be traced back to the production process. There was skin contact in the tank before the grapes were pressed, and then the wine was allowed to age a bit on lees, and that's the yeast sediment, which we've talked about before. And I think with that aging on the lees, that's contributed to that silkiness, I think, right?
Yeah.
But mostly, I think it's the wine's dryness that helps its long finish, right? This wine only has about 4 grams of residual sugar, and that would qualify it as a dry wine, you know, even under the strict rules of France's Alsace region.
Okay, yeah. I mean, and it is interesting to really experience how when the sugar is out of the way, how all the flavors just get plenty of room to dance around. So, you know, with a wine of this caliber, how much are we talking about in terms of our listeners are going to want to go out and buy a bottle of this very dry Riesling? What is it looking like?
Well, Charlotte, as I mentioned earlier, and as we talked about, there were so many great Finger Lake Rieslings to choose from on our show today that it was ultimately this price-quality ratio, that it was the price of this bottle that was the deciding factor for the one I chose to feature. I think this Ravines Dry Riesling delivers outstanding quality at an amazing price. At the time of our recording, you could buy this bottle on the Ravines website for $20.95.
Wow.
I mean, you're getting a 93-point Suckling rated wine for $21. That's a deal.
I mean, that is an incredible value proposition, as we like to always circle back to here on this podcast. So is it true then only for the 2020 vintage, or can our listeners get the same value with other Ravines releases?
That's a great question, Charlotte. I love the 2020 vintage for a lot of reasons. The weather was excellent that year, and that translated into a wonderful wine, right? But for purely sentimental reasons, this 2020 represents hope, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me that not everything about 2020 was horrible.
That's a good point. I mean, you are always the wine philosopher.
Well, yeah, that's me, I guess, right? But to answer your question more fully, Ravines has been making wonderful Riesling for years, and they brag about it on their website, and rightfully so. They call Riesling the grape that put them on the map.
Oh, wow.
Right? And they tout the fact that Wine Spectator awarded different bottlings of their dry Rieslings as top 100 wines in the world in 2011, 2013, 2015, and 2016. and they feature a quote from the New York Times wine critic Eric Esimoff when he wrote, quote, "New York Rieslings don't come any better than those from ravines."
Wow, okay.
Right, end quote on that. So, I just think that 2020 was great. Vintages before that were great, and vintages after that are great. So whatever you can find from a consumer, I highly recommend you pick up a bottle of Ravine's Dry Riesling.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's quite the legacy here, and it's highly convincing to me. I mean, the bottle we're drinking today is a great example of the overall quality of the wines that Ravines represents.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And this is a good time to remind our listeners that the wines we drink on the show, the wines that we feature on the show, are the wines that we drink. Right?
True.
As our title says, wines we drink. We don't feature any promotional wines, and we don't take any money for wine trips in exchange for featuring a wine on the podcast. So I didn't get any sponsorship money or any kind of influencer money to go to the Finger Lakes. We only feature wines we like, and we're not paid to promote them.
Yep, that's such a good point. I mean, especially when we're advocating for you to go out and try something, it's important to know that we are always independent here at Wines We Drink. So let's go ahead and turn our taste buds to the pairing period for this wine and food. It is my favorite part, so naturally I'm inclined to head us there. What do you suggest will work well with this Ravines Dry Riesling?
Well, I like to think of this as a racy Riesling, right? Oh. You know, it's got that acidity, it's got that stone fruit undertones, it's got some tropical notes, it's got that citrus, power behind it. So this is my go-to wine for some lightly spiced fish tacos.
Oh, yum.
Grill some white fish, tilapia or something like that. Add some crunchy lettuce in there, and then a mango salsa, which will help pull out those tropical undertones, and I think you'll be set.
I mean, that sounds delicious to me. I can see how the citrusy flavors of the wine will complement some fish tacos. Again, I think I've mentioned this before. We always think about when we squeeze that lemon on seafood, so naturally follow your gut when it comes to food pairings. And so this sounds like something I'm definitely going to have to try soon, especially in the summer. It sounds like a great meal. But what about a cheese pairing for a dry Riesling like this?
Well, I'm going to suggest that you need a creamy style of cheese to complement the dry acidity of this wine, right? Brie works, as does Camembert. And I've got some delicious Camembert cheese here for us to try today. This is a soft cheese that is buttery and has a mild sweetness that absorbs some of that acidity. So, let's get started with some tasting of some Camembert and our dry Riesling.
Don't mind if I do. Oh my gosh. Okay, going in for a sip. Wow. That is such a great pairing. I mean, the buttery flavor works, but I'm really thinking back to the texture of the wine too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a gooey cheese, all right? The creamy, gooey Camembert. But the wine was called silky on the finish, right? And that goes nicely with this cheese. It has that creamy, velvety smoothness, right?
Right. I mean, and they go so well together. I'm just like, water, mouth is water.
All right. Yeah. Go in for another bite.
Okay. Don't mind if I do. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm planning to taste a few more bites and sips as we leave you for a short break. We'll be back in just a moment with the finish. Keith has some more thoughts about the Finger Lakes to share with us.
Yes, I do.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us during the segment we call The Finish. This is where we bring the show to a close with some additional insight about today's wine conversation. And today, Keith has some more tidbits to share with us about his trip to the Finger Lakes.
Charlotte, I'm going to start by telling all of our listeners to go there for themselves, right?
Good advice.
Yeah, especially if you're a wine person. you owe it to yourself to visit what has turned out to be the largest wine-producing region in the U.S. outside of California.
Wow, I didn't realize that it's that large of a producer.
Yeah, there are over 140 wineries there, so I felt like I only scratched the surface. I mean, we're already looking forward to our next trip. Not sure when that's going to be, but
Right.
it's on the list. And not only for the wine, right? But for our listeners who go there, I mean, you plan your vacation around it because there is spectacular scenery. I mean, the entire area encompasses 11 glacier lakes over 9,000 square miles,
Wow.
right? There are gorgeous waterfalls everywhere. And if hiking isn't your thing, you can easily navigate paved trails at the Watkin Glen State Park. At that state park, when you're on their trail, there's a waterfall around every turn.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
That sounds like such a great vacation spot. But let's go back to talking about the area really as a wine region. You mentioned earlier that it was Dr. Frank who essentially established the wine industry there in the 1950s. But what led him to understand that it really wasn't too cold there for grapes?
Well, I think the better question is, why did it take the area so long to understand that it could be a grape-growing region?
Okay, well, what do you mean?
Well, we established earlier that Wine Folly considers Mosel, Germany to be a prime region for growing Riesling. That area is actually much further north than the Finger Lakes. Think about that. Mosel is around the 50th degree latitude, but the Finger Lakes region is between the 42nd and 43rd degrees latitude. That's the same as Spain's Rioja, famed wine region, right?
Yeah.
But of course there are other elements that make up climate, and it does get bitterly cold in the Finger Lakes in the winter, right? So that's why those lakes are so important. They provide a moderating influence for the vineyards, the same as the Mosel River provides in Germany.
Okay, that is so fascinating and a really good geography lesson. I mean, it certainly helps to answer some of my questions about the area and what makes it such a good geographical spot.
Right. So for any of our listeners who want to travel there, I suggest focusing on the area around the three largest lakes, particularly for your first visit. Seneca Lake has about 61 wineries. Cayuga Lake has about 25 wineries, and Kuka Lake has 19 wineries.
Wow.
I mean, you can't visit them all on one vacation, but scouting out these lakes will give you a great sense of the region and its wines.
That's such good advice, and now I need to go and plan my trip there. Thank you for being our travel guide today, and thank you for introducing me and us, our listeners, to today's vibrant wine selection. It is certainly a favorite now. I'll be having more from Ravines for sure. So, next week, where are we going?
Well, my tour guide duties continue next week, okay? We're going to continue with the trip. I'll be regaling you with some stories from my trip back to California.
Okay.
But we're not going to one of the most recognized California wine regions, right? When we were visiting there this most recent trip, we went to what I would call an emerging wine region that many of our listeners may not be familiar with.
Okay, well, that was a lovely tease. I'm looking forward to more of your travel logs. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Please come along again next week for our next show.
Yes, cheers everyone.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Wines We Drink, and check out our episode guides at wineswedrink.com. Cheers.